Now we have the third and final big picture model, and that's the multiple nuclei model. The idea here is there's multiple centers. And so, yeah, downtown matters. It's the most visually distinctive. But we also have Carmel, Brownsburg, Avon, Greenwood, Southport, Lawrence, Broad Ripple, downtown, the Lafayette Square area, in which we have these individual areas that kind of serve themselves. And so we have multiple downtowns. We've got all these areas that have, a good amount of jobs, good amount of restaurants, good amount of places to do grocery shopping. So why do you need, to be focused on that one central business district, or that one central key area, like it used to be? And that's key to that is understanding the role of automobiles and interstates. And now we can live farther away from our workplace, and we can just essentially move and scatter ourselves throughout the city, which I'll attempt to showcase here on some maps. And so here is, once again, our 9 metropolitan counties. And this is houses built before 1939. This is from our good friends at Savi, S-A-V-I, IUPUI based operation. What we got going on here is we look at the homes, the choropleth map. We can see overwhelmingly inside 465, especially close to the downtown, where most of the new homes were built before 1939. Which, when we look at the next decade, the 1940s, first off, we don't see a lot of new home construction because, first off, we're at war. Second off, we do see some increases after World War II, though, because it ended in 1945. And so the late 1940s, you did see some new home construction, especially once, if you compare it to the previous map, you'll notice that it's a little bit farther away from the central business district. So you see that kind of that invasion succession, kind of the moving outward, continually moving outward, slowly but surely. You definitely see that apparent in this particular pattern. By the 1970s, once again, you see a further outward migration. So you see more new home construction occurring closer to 465, but you start seeing outside 465 some new home construction popping up. But by the 1990s, you clearly see the new home construction occurring overwhelmingly outside of 465, so way outside of the downtown area, the central business district. And so what this is really where we now see the multiple nuclei model really apparent. So you have all those navy blue areas. All those navy blue areas also illustrate new downtowns, or essentially new areas of development, in which what's happening is those are the cores of these new urban realms, of these new areas that are essentially serving themselves. And so what we have is we have these multiple areas where we're going to find jobs, we're going to find residents and places to live, we're going to find shopping options, we're going to find shopping malls. So all of this we now see in the 1990s evidence of the multiple nuclei model quite clearly in terms of just new home construction, which continued to move outward and more dispersed in the 2000s. Here's my custom map in which I identified different shopping malls that you find throughout metropolitan Indianapolis. And so the idea here is a shopping mall, a big, huge shopping mall, like, for example, the Greenwood Park Mall, or downtown, the Circle Center Mall, or way up on the north side, Keystone at the Crossing in Castleton Square in Glendale, and all of that, the Hamilton Town Center thing, whatever that is. All of these are examples of them serving themselves. And so these all are essentially cores, or in the core areas that serve the surrounding residents. And so we have a very dispersed pattern, a very much multiple nodes or multiple cores that is evidenced just by looking at the location of major shopping malls, big shopping malls, not little dinky strip malls, but big, huge malls that we find in this particular area. And so, for example, if you live on IUPUI's campus, you're not going to go all the way up to Carmel to find a pair of pants that you could also find at the downtown Circle Center Mall. So we all pretty much just stay in our area. And so when it comes to simple things we need, i.e. the central place theory, we can kind of tie in with that. We're going to stay within our own area. So this all helps to explain the multiple nuclei model, but also something that the multiple nuclei morphed into, the urban realms model. Now what I've done is I've tried to take the urban realms idea and kind of try to model it somewhat on Indianapolis like I've did in the other land use models. So now what we see is, first off, we zoomed out. because now this explains a much larger pattern, a much more metro-wide pattern that we see today. And so once again, we've got all these individual layers. We've got the concentric ring model, we can still see to this day. We got the sector model, but in the case of understanding the entire metro-wide 9-county pattern, we can definitely say we see the multiple nuclei, but what it morphed into the urban realms, which I'll showcase here. And these different yellow dots, which kind of represent downtowns. They're not perfect, they're not precise. I'm just kind of throwing them on there with this idea that they serve surrounding peripheral areas. But one of the things in this model, or this illustration that I have here, is you'll note that there's smaller urban realms up in the northern part of Indianapolis. Why did I do that? Because it's more densely populated. So once again, when we think about threshold, when we think about central place theory, we can also tie that in here into understanding why these urban realms might be smaller in one area where we have more people, where we have dense populations, but then bigger in other areas where we have less population or where it's less density. We can understand and we can tie in these different concepts together. Isn't that great? But not as great as this pepperoni pizza. Why did I take a picture of my pizza and put it here on this particular video? Because the pepperoni pizza is also kind of a metaphor for the urban realms model. So the idea here is you have these individual pepperonis. So these individual pepperonis pretty much serve themselves. So one of the things why this is useful is when people ask me, well, what's it going to look like? What's Indianapolis going to look like in 20 years as, you know, more and more people, as maybe the population gets up to 2 million people in the metro area? And I just say, well, what's going to happen is the pizza is just essentially going to get bigger, and you're just going to add more pepperoni pieces to the pizza. So it's essentially the pattern that you can go ahead and predict going forward. And you're already seeing this in certain areas of the country. For example, Atlanta. Atlanta and Chattanooga are separated by 150 miles. But what's happening is both of those cities are growing outward so much that their pepperoni pizzas are almost starting to merge, come together. And so essentially the pepperoni pizza is just getting bigger as they add more suburban areas and more areas and clusters of businesses and jobs and residents. Also, why this is useful is if you notice this pepperoni, maybe not so much this one, but a lot of the ones I've gotten beforehand from other places, is you'll find that some pepperonis are nice, big, juicy ones. Man, they taste so good. Other ones are kind of little you know, shriveled, little burnt, not as good. And so we can also use that as a proxy to understand our metro areas. We have some urban realms that have a lot of amenities, that have a juicy pepperoni, that have, you know, everything that one would want, a variety of stores, restaurants, health foods, all of that. Whereas in other areas, they might just have fast food restaurants, gas stations, you know, a small grocery store that doesn't have a lot of variety, you know, hardly any amenities, hardly any parks, you know, bad schools. So when we look at the metropolitan area, we have to kind of think of it in these urban realms now, in which we have these different pepperonis, these different places that have good amenities and places not so much.